If you're a woman and you're looking to use intermittent fasting for those really great health benefits and the fat burning benefits, but you're concerned if it's going to do more harm than good, I'm breaking down the details of why you've heard that you shouldn't use intermittent fasting, as well as the details of why you should consider using intermittent fasting in today's video. Alright guys, if you're new to my channel and you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's in nutrition human performance. On my channel, I'm typically talking about the science-backed and holistic methods that you can use in order to achieve your wellness dreams. So if you have a wellness goal in mind, make sure you subscribe. All right, so the first thing to understand is that there's a bunch of different types of intermittent fasting, and some are more compatible with daily life and some aren't. Now, not eating or fasting for 12 to 16 hours and then having an eating window of about 8 to 12 hours is considered a type of intermittent fasting called time-restricted eating. And the first thing you really need to understand when it comes to intermittent fasting is that intermittent fasting is not inherently a form of calorie restriction. A lot of people use it that way, but it's not in itself a form of calorie restriction. In fact, I really never recommend using calorie restriction in general, but also paired with intermittent fasting, and I'll get to that in a bit why. And there are other ways of using intermittent fasting as well that you've probably heard of. One is alternate day fasting. The basic premise on how this one works is how you fast on one day, and that's about 500 calories that you eat in a day, and then on the next day you feast and you eat as much as you want. Obviously, this differs a lot from that fasting period each day of 12 to 16 hours because now we're entering in calorie restriction as part of the protocol. There's also OMAD, which is 1 meal a day, and that does work for some people. It's kind of like an extended version of that time-restricted eating protocol. But when it comes to alternate day fasting or OMAD, just generally speaking, it's not something I recommend because it can be difficult to adhere to on a regular basis as well as interfere with your social life. Now let's talk about why people are telling you not to use intermittent fasting if you're a woman. It'll mess up your hormones. It's probably the first thing that you'll hear about it. Now, the human studies that I've found just don't back up this claim. It's mostly just possible speculation and extrapolating from one rat study. And the main study that you'll see referenced often time and time again when it comes to women's hormones being messed up from intermittent fasting is this one. It's a rat study that was done using alternate day fasting protocol. And this study took an experimental group of rats where they basically just had them fast for 24 hours and then eat ad libitum, which means as much as they want, the next day. Obviously, other than the fact that they're rats, the major distinction here is the type of fasting that they are following. It follows that alternate day fasting type of protocol. It doesn't follow what a lot of people are using intermittent fasting for, which is that 12 to 16 hour fasted period, and then eating those satiating foods to help to balance your blood glucose levels. But moving on, the reason why this study is mentioned so much is because the study found that using this method of fasting for these rats caused the rats' ovaries to shrink. And of course, this makes sense. Every other day, the rats didn't eat, which means that they were missing an entire day's worth of nutrients every other day. Again, this is much different than having an 8 to 12 hour eating window that you incorporate your meals worth for that day into that eating window. In this type of fasting period where it's more time restricted eating and you're eating enough of what you need in that day and eating until satiated with that 12 to 16 hour fast, you're allowing your GI tract to rest at some point during the day while still eating enough during that eating window and not snacking after dinner. And during that eating window, you're eating meals that are satiating and not calorie restrictive, so your body does not think it's in a state of starvation and you're providing the nutrients that your body needs in order to thrive. And it's really interesting because I often see these two main presumptions made about intermittent fasting that are just not true. First is that it's calorie restrictive and therefore you are starving. I cannot tell you how many articles I've read about people saying that you should be cautious with intermittent fasting because you're essentially just starving yourself every day. First of all, that's what calorie restriction is, period, a state of semi-starvation, and that is not what intermittent fasting inherently is. You can use it that way, but it's not what it is. And plus, going back to that rat study, it even explicitly states in the introduction how it has been so obvious throughout time that food restriction causes issues with fertility, aka calorie restriction. Note that it says food restriction, not short states of fasting and then therefore eating until satiated each day. This means that long-term calorie restriction model of weight loss could and is very likely negatively affecting your fertility. The studies that are done on humans with intermittent fasting are typically done on those with the Ramadan style of fasting, which is where you don't eat from dawn to dusk. So it is slightly different from the traditional type of intermittent fasting where you're eating very early and very late, but this type of study is actually done on humans, which is a huge plus. And these studies have found that during these times of Ramadan fasting, that there is actually no change in the female human hormones. In fact, there have even been small studies that have found that those short periods of fasting can actually help with conditions like PCOS, which is one of the largest endocrine disorders that females experience. The second thing that you'll often hear is that intermittent fasting will cause you to develop an eating disorder or binge eating. First of all, calorie restriction period has been found time and time again to promote that binge eating behavior in those who have a history of binge eating or bulimia, which is why I don't recommend pairing intermittent fasting with calorie restriction. It's not because the combination is what's so bad, it's because the calorie restriction period is what can be so harmful. If you're recovering from an eating disorder, intermittent fasting is probably not going to be a great choice. Not because intermittent fasting itself is the problem, but because it can be used to help restrict calories. And the calorie restriction is what has been seen to be a problem, especially with the corresponding hunger that coincides with calorie restriction. This is the same reason why you typically wouldn't recommend a calorie counting app for someone who's recovering from a history of eating disorders. It will just promote calorie restriction. But this also doesn't mean that you shouldn't eat all day and not focus on the quality and the types of foods that you're eating, because this itself could also lead to that unstable blood glucose level and therefore the dips in the blood sugar levels that will cause you to feel that insatiable hunger, insatiable sugar cravings, and put you on that roller coaster rides of the highs and the lows, which is not going to be conducive for helping you to heal. In fact, I recently did a video with a therapist and talked about one of the better approaches that someone who's recovering from an eating disorder can use in order to still balance those blood glucose levels, but not use intermittent fasting. So if you're interested, you can check it out right here. All right, so here's why intermittent fasting, or just not eating for that 12 to 16 hour period, is not only good for you, but it's natural. With the typical type of advice of eating every couple of hours, eating right when you wake up, and then every couple hours from then, this leads to the complete shut off of a very natural system of self-cleaning within the GI tract called the migrating motor complex, or MMC. The main job of the migrating motor complex is to flush out the left behind bacteria and food that could be in the small intestine, and therefore helps to reduce the risk of issues like IBS or SIBO or bloating. We are not supposed to have that much bacteria in our small intestine because that's where we absorb nutrients, so we don't want that bacteria to steal it from us. And so therefore we need to have that migrating motor complex to help flush it out. And the MMC is only stimulated from not eating. And it takes about 4 hours to complete this whole cycle. If you eat during this 4 hour period, like for example with eating every couple of hours, then you're completely shutting off your MMC pathway. Now you're probably wondering, well, what about when you sleep? Isn't that not eating for at least 4 hours? That's true, but you actually really slow down your GI tract in general, including the MMC when you sleep. So you don't really get the full benefits of the MMC when you're sleeping. So that's where having some type of fasted period, incorporating those breaks between your meals by eating until satiated, is essential for stimulating your MMC during the day and therefore cleaning out your gut to help prevent that bacterial overgrowth that therefore leads to issues like bloating all the way to SIBO. And with the huge rise of issues like IBS and SIBO and bloating, it's more important than ever to make sure that we stimulate this very natural process and very important process of the MMC. So the simple fact that eating every couple of hours shuts off this very essential aspect of GI health makes me see that eating every 2 hours is not natural and it's not beneficial. If it were natural to eat every 2 hours, then it wouldn't also interfere with a very natural process in our body. Another really important factor to consider when it comes to intermittent fasting and using it daily is the extremely beneficial effect it has on our insulin sensitivity. Now, insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, which is where we have high levels of insulin in the blood, are two really important factors that can negatively affect hormone balance, fertility, and weight. Hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance are both strongly tied to issues such as fertility and PCOS, namely because these high levels of insulin have been found to cause the ovaries within the female body to overproduce the androgen or male hormones that lead to issues like fertility and PCOS. And one of the main benefits of using intermittent fasting is that it helps improve insulin sensitivity, which is the exact opposite of insulin resistance. And this makes complete sense because when you're eating less often, having those breaks between meals, having some type of fasted period, you're not having to secrete or release insulin as often, therefore helping to drop that insulin level lower and make your body more sensitive to it. And this of course is really important for when it comes to weight loss because insulin is our main storing hormone that shuts off fat burning. So if we can help to bring that insulin lower, then we can also help to tap into fat burning mechanisms. This is also to say that intermittent fasting does not dictate what you eat, just when you eat it. If you aren't following the satiating meals that simultaneously address that insulin resistance as well, then you won't reap those same benefits of intermittent fasting. And therefore you also likely won't achieve your goals or feel too great. So if you are new to intermittent fasting, I highly recommend you check out the 10 signs that you need to start using intermittent fasting right here. Also, if you're new to my channel and you love this science-backed information, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right guys, thanks so much for tuning in and I'll see you in my next video.